And we're live. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the second Great Israel Palestine debate. To those watching, again, thank you for joining us. Feel free to have a lively discussion in the comments. Feel free to ask questions to our guests. And maybe even drop where you're from. Where are you tuning in from? I imagine we have people from all around the world. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Um, a little bit about, what we're doing today. The goal behind the great Israel-Palestine debate is to explore what seems to be one of the most complex conflicts in the world. It's a conflict that spans over a century, and it's a conflict that involves not only land, but religion, history, and culture. Um, this will be an ongoing series, so we're going to be trying to do these discussions every single week. It will be an opportunity to show different narratives from what the mainstream narrative is. And also, it's going to be an opportunity to prove that Israelis and Palestinians can come together and engage in respectful dialogue. This isn't the type of debate where one side aims to defeat the other, rather, where both sides approach this in good faith and with the goal of finding common ground. I know, you know, today social media in general is sensationalized. Everyone wants to see people arguing and fighting. That's not what we're attempting to do here. We're trying to do something different. We're trying to reach common ground. We're trying to learn new things. And ultimately, we're trying to achieve peace on this land. So I'm very, very happy to introduce our two guests. I just want to make sure, on my right, you'll see Dr. Warda Sa'de.
Sada.
Dr. Warda is currently residing in Bejala, and she has over 20 years of educational experience working with both Palestinian and Israeli youth. She understands that education is essential to solving the conflict and dedicates her time towards that goal. Um, she's also very active in various peace building initiatives, including Women Wage Peace and Minds of Peace. These are two awesome organizations. I suggest you all check them out. And below me, I hope you guys see what I see. So Warda is to my right and Rudy is below me. That's at least how it looks on my screen. Um, and I'm very, very happy to introduce Rudy as well. Currently residing in Herzliya, is a Jewish and Israel rights activist. He's considered a social media influencer with over 70,000 followers, creating educational viral videos aimed at shifting the global ideological and political conversation regarding the Jewish people and Israel. His work primarily focuses on empowering Jews and allies, uniting sectors of Israeli society to craft a better reality for all living in the land, and as well as generating innovative ways to combat anti-Semitism. You should check out his page. I will drop links in the comments because he's doing some awesome stuff. I'm seeing in the comments, speak a little louder, hard to hear you. Are other people having trouble hearing me? Thanks for the shout out, Virag. Good to see you here in the chat. Just give a little, before we get started, we have people from Westchester, New York, from Canada, from Sweden, from Germany, NYC, baby, as they say, Los Angeles, Israel, Jerusalem, Charleston, South Carolina, Santa Barbara, California, Livingston, New Jersey. Amazing. Great. So um, I gave a little introduction. If you guys feel like you'd like to say a little bit more about yourselves, feel free to do so. But my first question, this is how I want to open it. We're going to start by talking about the concept of anti-normalization. So for those who are unaware, there is a very strong anti-normalization movement amongst Palestinian society. And essentially what this means is you do not normalize with the enemy. It is a movement that is against any ties with Israelis because essentially, by normalizing ties with them, you're accepting the conditions they have put you in. This is, in short, the narrative of anti-normalization. Now, Dr. Warda is here, and essentially by doing this, she's normalizing. And Dr. Warda has been accused of normalizing in the past. So I want to hear from you, Warda, what your thoughts on normalization are, and what you tell people who think that there's an issue with what you're doing.
So, as you said, making normalization is not to make mutual and natural relations with two equal people is in the same situation and position. It's to get the relation better, but better by their choice. Regarding Israel and Palestine, the relations are not equal. One is occupying the other. Palestinians in any positions need to get permission to cross the checkpoints, even Palestinians who live in the Area C, which is controlled by Israeli army. While Israeli citizens can enjoy moving freely, not in Area C now, for now, but before also, before it was, enjoying the freedom in any place from the river to the sea. If you speak about normalization between Israel and Arab countries, it's different. Arab countries are part of a Palestinian case. They have to support the case by an normalization to strengthen the Palestinians who are occupied. So only with justified peace, good and rich normalization will be unstandable. Now, what we make now, we make negotiation, people from Palestine with people from Israel, thinkers from both sides thinking, are negotiating, are taking the chance to meet each other to speak about peace and how we can make this peace. It's not, that they are going to work to have fun together. Even if they have sometimes fun together, they are human beings. They meet each other as a human beings that they want a solution. So negotiation for peace is not called a normalization. And something else, there is in the PLO organization from 2012, there was a committee which was supported by Abu Mazen, speaking about meeting Israeli to make negotiation, not normalization. Speaking about Israeli who think that they can make peace with us. They can know us better and don't see us with this that as a frightened people or just terrorists or something. We need to make this situation be more and more, because as much as the other side, you think that you make peace with him. For example, Palestinian workers can go to Israel to work unless they pay a lot of money to get a permission to work. Part of their money, they pay it for the permission. They don't get all their rights. It's not normalization. They searching for something to eat. So negotiation for peace, having working in the other side in Israel, because they don't have any other jobs because of the occupation, which closed the area for Palestinians to make. It's closed. For example, in Gaza, it's closed. They don't have a lot of opportunities to work. So the only opportunity is to work in Israel. Is it normalization? No. So normalization, as I told you, as you said also, it has to be with normal and equal situation positions. And here it's not speaking about normalization by making negotiation for peace. Negotiation for peace, it's not normalization. It's working to make peace, because otherwise we can't make peace. We can't meet. That's it.
Great. So before passing it to Rudy, I just want to make sure that we fully understand your position. Normalization, if it's in the form of dialogue and negotiation to progress the peace process, is okay. If it's Palestinians needing to work with Israelis, it's okay. But if it's kind of just this like kumbaya type of normalization, where it's like, let's pretend like there is no conflict, let's just be friends and let's not even focus on the conflict, that is a form of normalization that you are against.
If we speak about normal and the people themselves, they work together. They are human being, as I saw. They have a human being relationship. When we speak about the authorities, it's something else. Authorities, I mean army, I mean government, I mean everything that connected to the occupation. It's called that, there is cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli Authority about something that they have convenience about it, but about them. But it's only because they want to make it easy for the people, and not to make it not to make it so strict. It's to, even this, they accuse it as normalization. I can't say that it's because it give peace also for the Palestinian people and for the Israeli people. I hope that this cooperation be part of the peace process, because without that we can't. We will stay in the same position: occupation, occupation, occupation.
Rudy, would you like to give some thoughts on your views on normalization and what Dr. Warda said?
Yes, of course. First of all, salam, Dr. Warda Sa'de, and shalom, my brother.
Sorry, he started with me with asking. I even didn't say hello or masal khair or erif tov. It's okay. Thank you.
But in all fairness, we did have a nice chat before the live went up. So.
Yeah, that's it.
And we're all family at the end of the day, so we're communicating in order to figure things out and to move forward. And at the end of the day, the way I see it is that there's no future where Palestinians disappear, and there's no future where Israelis disappear. So we're going to need to, especially in this generation, be able to come together in order to create a better reality. But before I address the question, there are many points that were brought up that I'd love to share my perspective, the narrative of Israel, which may differ from the narrative of my person that I'm speaking to. And I'm going to address firstly the last three words that you finished on, where you said occupation, occupation, occupation. The word occupation refers to foreign control, a foreign entity controlling a population on a foreign land. And that's not the situation, because the Jewish people are the native population of the land. Our civilization was destroyed. The Roman Empire conquered that civilization, renamed the land Palestine. And the land named Palestine, that word is a Hebrew word which actually means invaders, invaded land. And they named that land Palestine 500 years before the birth of Islam. So many hundred years before Arabs even moved into the land. Now, of course, Arabs who have since moved in should have the right to live in this land fully, equally, like every single other human being. But when we're using the term occupation, it gives a connotation sort of as if Jews are these foreigners that are controlling the local native population. That's actually not the situation at all. I do completely agree that the status quo is horrible. I'm completely against the status quo. I'm completely against the walls that exist both physically and also psychologically between our populations. I completely disagree that Palestinians don't have the right to access into Akko and Yafo and all sorts of places within Israel where they can visit their families or visit places that they formerly lived in. And I'm completely against the limitation of movement for Jews to go to Shechem and to Bethlehem and to all sorts of places that we used to live in, and that was very relevant to us. But what's important to understand is that there's limitation of movement for both populations. The same way Palestinians they can go into Area C and into Israel if they have a permit, and I'm against the system. Yeah, I'm against the fact that people need to have permits in order to travel in the land that we all should be living in. However, Israelis cannot enter into Area A that is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, cannot enter Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas. So there's limitation of movement to both. The structures are different, the suffering are different, and we should not play a competition on who is suffering the most. We need to focus on a conversation on how do we move forward and transcend these problems. So when I think Gaza was mentioned that is closed, again, I'm against the fact that Gaza is closed. Literally, anyone who wants to come in and out, it's very difficult to do so, and anything coming in has to be processed by Israel, which has no representation within Gaza. So an element of a foreign entity, a foreign government that is controlling the daily lives of Palestinians living in Gaza, although Gaza, we also Jews, it's part of our native land where we've lived in. But I'm against this situation. But the reason the situation exists, we have to be able to break down the context, right? If there wasn't constant wars and constant attempts by Hamas to destroy Israel, and in fact, even in the original charter, they said that we need to kill all the Jews and we need to destroy Israel, and they still very much so believe in that. If that wasn't a part of what Hamas was actively pursuing to do, there would be no war, there would be no blockade, there would be no limitation of movement. So I am 100% for removing these problems and these struggles that exist for both of our populations. But when we mention them without giving the context behind them, understanding, unpacking them, it not only does an injustice to the experience on the other side, but also it does an injustice to solving them. Because if we only use suffering and we take it out of context, it's sort of used as political ammunition to tarnish the image of another side. So when it comes to speaking about equality, yes, the situation is not equal for all sides. There's limitation of movement, like we mentioned before. And I think it's very important that we have a conversation on the specifics. And we also understand the terms that we use, because for a lot of Israelis, hearing the term occupation is something that will right away shut us down. Because for us, when we hear that and when we have a relationship with the rest of the world saying that we're occupying, they're telling us that we don't belong here, that we're foreigners, that we aren't supposed to be here, and the system that exists is foreigners controlling the Palestinian population, and that's not the reality. So I'm against the occupation if we're talking about occupation in terms of the status quo. So I'm 100% will agree with you, but I think the term occupation is a term that really doesn't describe the situation well, and actually is a term that pours fuel on fire. And we have to, both of us, all of us, be able to try to come together to reduce that fire and to try to use that energy to actually be able to transcend this conflict and to create something a lot better than the current reality that exists. So in terms of normalization, I may have a different experience with this term and this concept than my counterpart. Of course, I come from a Jewish background, Israeli background, so there's no pressure on my community as far as my experience to not speak to Palestinians. In fact, for the most part, it's welcomed and encouraged, and people find it beautiful. Of course, there are many individuals that are extreme right-wing, and that the second that I even mention the word Palestinian, they, these keyboard warriors go online. It's like, how could you do that? They're not real, they're this. And it's like, of course they're real. There are millions of people and they're our cousins. And, it doesn't matter what they identify with, they're real human beings. And they were born and raised with this term Palestinian, and that's their identity. And if you reject calling themselves Palestinian, you're actually erasing who they are, and you're not even able to communicate to the person in front of you. So of course, there's a minority of people doing that. But for the most part, when it comes to Israelis and Jews, they're very welcoming and open to the discussion with Palestinians, because most Jews were not necessarily raised with the narratives and understanding of what Palestinians go through, but we were not raised to hate Palestinians. And I'm very thankful for myself, having never been raised to hate. I do wish that I was raised with a more understanding of Palestinian identity and Palestinian experiences that I was only able to acquire later on in my life through my experiences, through the people that I met, through the conversation that I had, through the books that I've read. And it wasn't something that was taught at a young age. But when it comes to normalization, in my experience, I went to a college campus called Columbia University. It's rated as one of the most anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist universities. It's a place where there's a lot of debate when it comes to specifically this issue. I founded the Israel group on college campuses. That was grassroots. We weren't right wing, left wing, one state, two state. Our goals wasn't to push a political agenda, but was to create conversations, to fight against anti-Semitism, and to try to build something on the ground in order to bring Palestinians and Israelis together for us to start that conversation and build a future together. My experience with anti-normalization means you cannot discuss, have conversation, have any sort of relation with anyone that represents anything of the other side. Meaning me as an Israeli, as a Jew, I can't be addressing anyone that supports the Palestinian cause, not as a law, but as what people who support anti-normalization. They reject even having a conversation with me. And so I think it's important to understand what anti-normalization means in different contexts. If anti-normalization meant in practice what my counterpart is speaking of, I would agree with it. I don't agree that Palestinians should forget the experiences, should forget about the struggles that happen, should just ignore these things and pretend that everything is okay. Absolutely not. For me, it's not okay. For me as an Israeli that is not going through those suffering, I have my own suffering that is different, right? I've lost many friends during this conflict. Our suffering is different. It's intertwined, it's interlinked, but it's different. But I see the suffering of Palestinians and I can't stand for it. So I'm definitely against normalization if it meant ignoring the problem and putting it to the side. But we need to have normalization in terms of having conversation, communication, humanization, understanding, and finding out what each other's need, because any future solution, which we're going to be talking in a later time about what potential solutions can be, but any future solution has to focus on two things. One, I say this all the time, solving the injustices that exist, right? Ending the injustice for both populations and fulfilling the aspirations that both people need, because both peoples have different sufferings and both peoples have different aspirations. And until we are actually able to discuss with one another, have relations with one another, understand one another, go to each other's houses, meet each other's families, see each other in the eyes and actually speak to one another, we will never find out what is the other side suffering, what are the other side aspirations. And that's how the conflict continues. The conflict continues from us preventing ourselves from coming together, and people are profiting from it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I just have a quick
I
follow-up.
can, I just want to make a small note. Can I?
Yeah, wait just one moment. I just have a quick follow-up and then I'll give you the mic.
Okay.
Okay. So Rudy, what you said really resonated with me, that you grew up not knowing enough about the Palestinian narrative. And, I had the same experience. I didn't know anything about Palestinians except that they wanted to kill us. That's really all my worldview was about them. I wasn't raised to hate them, just that we need to fear them and protect ourselves against them. And in recent years, I've learned more and understood that it's way more complex and that they have, every right to live on this land and live with security and dignity and respect. Now, I, like you, most of my life would cringe when hearing the word occupation and the word Palestine. Those are two cringe words amongst Israelis. Most Israelis don't accept those terms. Now, let's say we don't consider it an occupation. We still do have a situation where you have a population who is controlled by another nation's military. So would you agree to use the term military occupation? And if not, do you have a better term that we could use to describe the situation on the ground?
Well, to follow up with that, if we're talking about particularly Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, if we use the word occupation in terms of control, there's a three-part occupation. There's area A, area B, area C, and they're being occupied in different ways. What I have a problem with is when we look at Jews living in Israel or Jews living in area C and we call that occupation, when Palestinians live in Gaza or they live in area A, that's not an occupation. It makes it seem almost as if they have legitimacy to live here, but we do not. And that's not the case. I think we all have legitimacy to live here. I think we all need to create a civilization where we can coexist, where we have access to movement, access to resources equally, completely, 100%. But when we use these terms, it sort of gives a demonizing element of the situation, and it holds a double standard. Now, there is a reality that the IDF gets to dictate elements of Palestinian lives, and they don't have a right to representation towards the Israeli government. Now, we're not talking about Israeli Arabs that do have a right to representation in the Israeli government, and many Arabs even join the IDF, but Palestinians living in area A and B and Palestinians living in Gaza are often controlled, not every single day, but when the IDF does go into these areas or when they set up checkpoints, they control elements of their daily lives. And I'm against this reality. I'm against this reality, and I will stand here with all my Palestinian cousins and fight against this reality to create a better reality. But I think it's a problem to use the term occupation, whether it's occupation or military occupation, because it gives a perception, not only for Israelis when we hear it, which is why it's so important to have this conversation now, but for the rest of the world, in which they associate us to foreigners. And that's something that's deeply wrong and deeply offensive to Jews, which are native people. Right, when you dig in the land, you find Jewish history. The language of the land is Hebrew. So we are the native civilization, and to call us foreigners is like calling Native Americans foreigners in America, or calling Tibetans foreigners in Tibet, or Maoris in New Zealand, or Aboriginals in Australia. We are the native population of this land, and we need to create a reality where all living in this land. Now, there are many other peoples that have moved in: Druzim, Cherkesim, Bedouin, Greek Orthodox, all sorts of different minorities that have moved in, because that's what happens during 2,000 years of colonialism, right? The land was passed down through different colonial foreign empires, lastly being the British. And during that time, you have colonial migration. You have different populations that move in, and they have a right today to live here, because regardless of how they came in, they live here now. They have a house, they have property, they have a residence, they have a relationship with the land, and they should live here equally. But I think we should use terms that don't pour fuel on the fire and don't offend the other side. And I would say there are certain things that we should fight for. Like, we should fight for Palestinians having the right to identify as Palestinians, even if people are against it. We should fight to define clearly and make people understand what Zionism means, which is not something evil. It's a basic concept of Jews having a right to self-determine on their ancestral land. It has nothing to do with the conflict. It has nothing to do with Palestinians. So I think an important part of every conversation is being able to define the terms so that we understand one another when we engage.
Great, thank you. Warda, in a minute, I will let you respond. I'm getting some comments that you guys can't hear me. Is my volume better now?
Yeah, now it's better.
Yeah, can the chat confirm that you guys can hear me better?
Yeah, I hear you better.
No, I'm looking for the people in the chat because they're the ones complaining. Whatever, if I don't hear anything, I'm assuming that you guys can hear me. So, Rudy, thanks for that response. I think that, we could benefit from creating a term to replace occupation, because just saying it's not an occupation without having a better term to describe the situation, it's just not effective. So maybe you and I can brainstorm afterwards to try to come up with something. Dr. Warda.
You can call me Warda.
Warda.
Yeah. So I think, the startup of Rudy, it's different from the startup of me. I don't want to go back to the history, because before 2000 years, there was also another people. There is the Canaans that we both came from, the Aramic people. And, I don't want to go there, but I know that Jewish people and Palestinian people each have deep historic, religious, and cultural connections to the land. So it's not, it's occupation, because you take the rights to live free. You take the rights to work free, to move free, to even to speak sometimes free. Yeah, and this is occupation, and it is occupation, as others said. It's military occupation. It's not that you convince them not to speak about this or this. It's occupation. And people don't feel good with this. It's not, people, Israeli people, all Israeli people think what you think, but many people think or start up from your this point, and this is a problem, because sharing homeland must be available for both people, and both must live in this shared homeland with equal rights, live freely, peacefully, safely, equally, with dignity and cooperation. So we can't make peace achieved by suppressing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian. As you said, you don't feel that it is okay, but if you think that it's not occupation, I can see that it's kind of arrogance. It's kind of feeling that we make for you good that you are living here in our lands or something. you know. So it's people here feeling the policy of arrogance, feeling the persecutions, the political arrest, the land grabbing, yeah, and it's not it's 100 years. It's since the Zionist contract with 100 1887 something with Herzl. There was no talking about even Israel here. But you know, I don't want to speak about the past, because we are here to speak about the future, about the present. But when we are speaking about the present, we have to taking in account the suffering of the people, because people has Palestinian people has the legitimate right to seek and achieve all their rights in accordance with the international conventions and PLO charter as the sole and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. You can say that here is the country of only the Jewish people, because before that there was living Jewish people. I know that from my grandfather, and they didn't think about having a country here. Now, and they didn't feel that it's not their country. They felt that it's their country. They felt safe. Only when the Zionist movement came, starting to make the situation burning, and people felt that Arabs are terrorists. You know, there is a video about someone Israeli historic people, someone who speaks about having Israel lands or Palestinian lands didn't cost him a lot, because people were here poor after 500 years of occupation of the Turkish and of course of the the British mandate. So people didn't feel that it was occupation, because many Jewish buy also lands or take lands from people who ran away after, you know, the Irgun, what happened. You know what the Irgun make at 1936 or 1938. People were safe people. Palestinians were safe people. Poor people didn't even think that a Jewish or a Christian or Muslim are not local people. And I think I can invite you to read about Uri Avneri story when he was very he said about himself terrorist against Palestinians, and then he said that I can't accept myself what I did when I was in the Irgun. So you know, you can't go 2,000 years ago and speak that it is my land. People live here, and we live here as Jewish and Muslims and Christians without the feeling that we are here neglected as it is citizens. Palestine was from the river to the sea. There was a lot of things that tell you there was a Palestine also, because some people said that there was no Palestine. I can give you a lot of things about even the shekel, you know, even the identity. Even Shimon Peres has a Palestinian identity. When he wanted to come here, he get this identity to come to Palestine, because you know it has authority here, something even local, even because it was a mandate, British mandate. It was also an occupation, 500 years of occupying the people here. And Jewish people came, not the Jewish people, I say that Zionist people came and took it so easy, because it wasn't something to quarrel about, because people felt, you know, there is also revolution at the 1936, but it was, you know, something that because they heard about the 181 and 242, 181 before, and then people feel that something is going here. So let us don't speak about who has the right to live here. We both now we are speaking about the right. Both Israeli and Palestinian people live here and live here, and they deserve to live here in peace. They deserve to live here in feeling safe and independent and self-independent and self determination. So this is the this is the situation. We are talking about history, which means because both of people has this background history. And about area, you speak about area A and area B. No one ask you not to go there, forbid you. It's only Israel, the army of Israel, forbidden you to go there. It's not the Palestinians authority who forbid you to go there. You can go there, but because they think that you are not safe there or something, you are forbidden to go by the law. I have the I'm Palestinian and I have a Israeli nationality, so I have dual identity. I go there and I don't feel, sometimes even Jewish people go with me there and they don't feel and people they talk even to the Palestinians and say that we are Jewish. We don't have a problem with Jewish. We have problem with the army because he suppress us. We have a problem with the authority, Israeli authority, with the occupation. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that, Warda. Rudy, I'd love to hear your response.
Yeah, so definitely I want to say that I appreciate this conversation. It's such an important conversation because so many times we talk to our own echo chambers and we're not able to experience different perspectives, different narratives, and these conversations are crucial in order to figure something out. So we can talk about the future, we can talk about the present. In fact, I think it's the most important thing is to talk about the future because we have a responsibility to our children, to our grandchildren, to our descendants, and even to ourselves. But we cannot ignore the past. And this is a point that I believe many Palestinian activists want to just brush over the past, but for Jews, it's a deep part of who we are. We carry the past with us. It's an element of our identity. We can't just ignore it. So we also have to understand that the relationship with our history, the relationship with the land may be different, and we can't just tell another population to ignore that. We have to be open to the way that different populations express themselves and the way that different populations have relations with different aspects. So when you mentioned before that before Herzl brought up about 100 years ago, there was no mention of Zionism, there was no mention of coming back to the land of Israel. It is true that Herzl coined the term Zionism. However, the ideas behind Zionism of coming back to Israel and reviving a Jewish state is something that exists for 2,000 years. The moment that we were kicked out by the Roman Empire, we promised ourselves each generation, every single day, to come back to Israel. The only reason that most people and my counterpart knows only about Zionism is because it's the only movement that succeeded. But there were many movements previously before Zionism that sought to do the same thing that Zionism did, but they failed. So it's important to understand Jews, why do we pray towards Jerusalem? Because that's where we believe we need to come back to. This is our civilization, this is our homeland. When we get married, I'm sure many people have seen the imagery or have been in Jewish weddings and have seen Jews get married and smash the glass and yell Mazel Tov. Well, the smashing of the glass represents the destruction of Jerusalem and the promise that the descendants within our marriage will come back to Jerusalem and rebuild that civilization and rebuild our capital. Every single year during Pesach, we say Shana Haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. This is not a religious thing. This is a cultural thing. This is an identity thing, which brings me up to my next point, which I think is one of the most important points in order to understand the differences. My counterpart was saying, we have Jews living here, we have Christians living here, we have Muslims living here, and that's true, and we should all live equally. But Jews is not equivalent to Muslims and Christians because Judaism is not a religion. Right? Christianity, whether you're born in South America or you're born in Africa or you're born in Asia, that's a belief system. You believe in Jesus, you believe in this New Testament, you believe in this, and so you're a Christian. And in order to become a Christian, you just accept Jesus. And if you reject Jesus, you're not a Christian. These are religions, these are belief systems that have crossed over borders. Judaism is not a religion, because a religion is just a belief system for any people. Judaism is not just a belief system, and it isn't for any people, it is for one people. It is a portable suitcase of our native identity from Judea, that when we were physically displaced from that land, although we always maintained a constant presence, even though most of us were displaced in the diaspora, and we created a portable suitcase that we passed down that identity from generation to generation, and the promise, Ledor Vador, that next year we will come back to Jerusalem and revive our civilization. So this is an important element of who the Jewish people are, and part of our aspirations that Palestinians need to hear, need to understand, the same way a lot of Israelis need to hear, need to understand what are the experiences, what are the relationships, who are the Palestinians, how do they see the land, how do they function. And not all Palestinians are homogeneous. There are many different elements to Palestinian identity that we need to understand, and many different villages that have different cultures that might oppose each other. So we need to understand deeper what it means to be Palestinian. And I think Palestinians need to understand deeper what it means to be a Jew, because if you're a Jew and you don't believe in Hashem, you don't believe in the Torah, you're still a Jew. By definition, it cannot be a religion. So that's when it comes to Judaism. We mentioned Canaanites. Now, the proof that Canaanites exist is from the Torah. So if we're sourcing the Torah, the Canaanites are depicted as foreign, dark-skinned people from Africa that had moved into the land and were foreign invaders. And if we're looking, historically, the first civilization that was created was the civilization of the Jews, and Canaanites poured in while the Jews were displaced in Egypt because they had left because of a famine. And I don't usually use the Torah as a source because we can't factually prove these things. But if we use Canaanites, which we can't actually prove their existence or a relationship with them, I know we found ancient remains in Syria and in Lebanon and different places, but we don't know that they're actually Canaanites. This word comes from the Torah. The fact that there was a civilization here that might be different than the Jewish people comes from the Torah. So if we use it as a source, we have to understand that this population in that source is described as a foreign invader nation that came into the land. But the native civilization, if you dig in the land of Israel, the artifacts that you find is of a Jewish civilization. So when it comes to occupation, if we're using the terms occupation to describe the status quo, then I'm against occupation. But I think it's a problem because there are different forms of occupation, and Israelis are going through a form of occupation as well. I can't enter into Gaza, right? And you mentioned about military. Hamas has its own military. The PA has its own security.
Go everywhere.
I can't go into Gaza, right? Hamas would not allow me to go into Gaza.
No, it is the situation, 20 years ago, buses were coming from
guys.
I would say the same thing, that it's the situation, and it's that situation that me and you are both against, and it's that situation that me and you need to both change. But when we use occupation, we're ignoring the experiences that Israelis go through, right? I can't go into Area A, not only because the Israeli government doesn't allow it, but because if I go, especially as someone with my reputation that is a Zionist, that supports Israel, and I go even with my flag, I'm a target right away. It's a real safety risk to be there. Even me and Adal did a video a few years back where we were in East Jerusalem, and we were having a message of coexistence, and we were afraid for our lives because that's also a reality that exists. And these attacks and internal fighting that exists does not represent the majority of the Palestinians. The majority of the Palestinians are real, good human beings that just want to live and are incredibly suffering from the status quo. However, I cannot enter certain areas, and there are military forces that are preventing me entering. So if we want to say occupation, then we have to use that term all across the board. There are different levels of occupation that different populations experience, and all those occupations have to end. If we use occupation to define control and the way that control is built, which is wrong for both sides, then I'm okay with it. But if the term occupation is only used to describe the relationship of the land when the Jews have sovereignty, when the Jews are in the land, then personally I'm against it. And this may be something that we differ. To keep going on to different points that we're I never said, I just have 3 more points to finish on.
Sure.
I never said that this country should be only for Jews, right? I believe every single individual, whether Jewish or not, should be able to live here. And in fact, in our culture, in our ancient civilization, we had non-Jews living with us. So we have no problem with non-Jews living here. But when we talk about this being a Jewish civilization, it's not a religious civilization. It's the same way that the Tibetans want to have a Tibetan civilization, and non-Tibetans can live in Tibet and be equal citizens. But it's about an identity of a native population, a native civilization. Just to finish off on the last point, first of all, Palestine was more than from the river to the sea. It also included the entirety of what is Jordan today. And the British decided to give that land as a form of, playing monopoly in the Middle East and give it to the Hashemite kingdom, which comes from Arabia. But if you mentioned one thing that I think is, I'm really passionate about particularly this issue, is about the Palestinian coin. Well, a Palestinian civilization, a Palestinian state, a Palestinian country did not exist prior to any time. We had Judea. Judea was destroyed. The Romans called the land Palestine before there were any even Arabs in the land. Different empires rose and fell, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, even the Arabs were here at one point, the Crusaders, and lastly the British. And it was always a territory controlled by a foreign government. It was never an actual civilization. Now, you brought up the coin. I actually have the coin right here with me. Hopefully we'll be able to see
your background. Oh, we got it.
So maybe for a little bit, but if anyone wants to Google this coin, it's the coin that the British Mandate had. And on it, you see, it says Palestine. Of course, this is the name of the territory that the British are occupying, illegally occupying, and actually that I think are a cause for a lot of the suffering and the hatred that both of our population experience. But on this coin, it says Palestine in Arabic, it says Palestine in English, and it says Palestina in Hebrew. But after the Hebrew, there's a parenthesis where it says Aleph Yud. And what does Aleph Yud mean? It means Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. So even on this coin that we bring up as the previous currency, which isn't even a legitimate currency, this belongs to the British. It does not belong to me and you or to our ancestors. If our ancestors were looking at this coin, we would both have rejected it because it's not minted based on our civilization, based on our culture, based on our values. But even on this coin that we keep bringing up as a reference to a state that existed that was called Palestine, it even says Eretz Israel on this coin. So it's important to understand the history, because if we don't understand the history, we can't unpack the things that we've gone through. We can't unpack the understandings that we both have, and we can't build what is most important in this conversation, which is building something for the future, which I think on those points, me and my counterpart for the most part agree.
So I think we can speak a lot about these points, and this will take us to the dead end. So we have to start speaking about the future by making programs. Because speaking about the past doesn't help us. But if we speak about the past, we're speaking about the past which is still present. I mean that people who after the Nakba in 1948, people were restored from where they were out of their houses and out of many things. They need to take back their rights. I have a program for that, because I think that we can't correct wrongs of the past by making wrongs in the present. And this is the point. So I have my idea of solution, which is two independent states, Israel and Palestine, living together with open country, with open shared borders. Israeli is the national home for Jewish people. Palestine is the national home for Palestinian people. The model of this solution is not totally new, and it's based on the model built in European Union. Many movements also has discussed this before, although there are some differences that are connected to some complicated issues, or the atmosphere didn't encourage presenting this or displaying it. So I will introduce my view. Maybe Rudy, you will like it, and maybe you work with me to convince more and more people, because I think forgetting about the past, because you are young, still young, maybe my children in your age. I want you and my children raise their own children in a different situation, different from what I was raised and other Palestinians were raised, and also, you know, the Israeli children also raised in some situation that are not convenient, and they you know, they have a dual values sometimes when saying in war we can kill, and in at home we can't even hit somebody. You know, it's not easy to raise children in this situation. So my as I said, my view has been designed and crystallized during many years, and lately through discussions and with Palestinian and Israeli thinkers of all social strata. You know, it's not only you know, the governmental stratas. It's all parts of the people. During meetings, for example, in Minds of Peace or Lands for All organizations, they work with a lot of people, Palestinian and Israeli thinkers, thinking what we can make, what they share in this what I call it like two countries, one land. Yeah, they shared these two countries common economic space and maybe one currency, maybe the shekel, maybe something else. I don't have a problem with that. Values of democracy and education for both countries. Mutual borders, open mutual borders, and Jerusalem. Since Jerusalem is very crucial and sensitive issue, I will speak about it later. So every country has independence in putting the rules for religion, state terms, society, immigrations, right of return. Every country has her own main institution, security coordination, court of justice, audit court, parliament, supreme council, like any normal country. So this program offers a new proposal of reconciliation between the two people based on the existence of two sovereign states in one open land. Every people manage his country according to issues, you know, like solving the problem of refugees. There has to be a committee that thinking about how to solve it. And as I said, said before, all grievances do not create new grievances. We don't want to make more problems for the present people. We can solve it and make this conciliation in another way that make all are good with these solutions. I believe that when the Palestinian state is established on 1967 borders with open borders between two states, Palestinian and Israel, and without restrictions or conditions, and with equal rights, all the residents of the country, just is the case in the countries of European Union, all citizens of both countries are entitled to move, to live, and work wherever they wishes. They wish within this land, from the river to the sea. Two states, one country is not a political. You know, it's kind of giving the people the feeling that we determined our life, we determined our theme in our country, but we live in peace with the other country. You can move to Gaza if you want, if you want to make business there, and the Gaza residents can move to Israel to work. Now, Israeli citizen can live in Palestinian Authority with he can be a resident there. He can, like, you know, green card or nationality in the United States. So he can vote for the Knesset, but he can vote in the local municipalities in Palestine, and he has to, to respect the Palestinian rules, local rules, because as I said and mentioned before, the whole country has the same rules, the same, democratic education, everything, even the rules of economic trade or something. They have to live in the same level. But we can also, the Palestinian, for example, can have his Palestinian nationality and can be a resident in Israel, working, having business there or something. In this program, they have to make committees, expert committees will sit down together, Israeli and Palestinian people sit together to make the rules, how it's going on, without making a problem of flowing people from here or from here. They have to discuss every point of this. I have a lot of points, but I can't speak it now because our discussion take about a lot of time. But it was nice flow, nice speaking, a nice talk about the other things. But maybe we can discuss this program more widely later, because it gives, Jerusalem, for example, will be the main capital for both people, without borders. So because of the Confederation country, all, the shared institution will be in Jerusalem. I suggest also that Tel Aviv and Ramallah, we another second capital, which means all the administrative things will be in Ramallah and Tel Aviv. So Jerusalem will be a little bit free from, these busy movements. But Jerusalem will be a symbol for both countries. There is the shared government or municipality, or with the Palestinian and the Jewish, and both together also make, they how to say that, they see what is going in both countries, for human rights, for education, for economic problems or solution, for resources, for everything. They shared every ideas together to solve the problems for both countries. So this solution maybe give the Jewish or the Zionist person the right to go to Gaza, to West Bank freely when he wants to work with Palestinian people. It gives the Palestinian people also feel freely to go. So this one land from the river to the sea will be both, will be for both people. I hope it will be negotiated in the future and the people will accept it. So I hope your children will live in this kind of country and feel not afraid to go to Palestinian territories or the Palestinian nation, and feel free even to live there and to work there, and with respect for the other people there.
Rudy, before I give you the floor, just a quick question, Warda. So your proposal sounds great. It's like a hybrid between one state and two states. It solves many of the problems that the traditional two-state or one-state solution do not solve. That being said, I'll tell you a concern that many Israelis have, and it's often the elephant in the room when discussing solutions. How do we ensure security? How do we ensure that the state of Palestine doesn't become like what we have in Gaza today?
I think when we're speaking about, as I told you before, speaking about Jerusalem as the symbol capital for both countries, and it has, you know, all the institutions that make the cooperation. Cooperation means not, I spoke about rules, about human rights, about democracy, about trade, about trading, about business, about everything. But in the first land, in the first point of view, in the first step, it has to be, you know, feeling security. Both Palestinian and both Israeli can be, you know, they can make like security committee which make the rules and take care of the security, because every people has to also to think that the other people in the same land have to be secure. So Palestinian will take care of the security of Israeli, and the Israeli take care of the security of Palestinian. You know, sometimes it might be problems, like, you know, in some villages there is problems, in some families there is problems between families also. But there is some institutions that take care to make these rules applied, and make, you know, the security and the safety the safely people, for both people to be safe, not, you know, to be no racism, no, it has to be, you know, displacement, suffering, regardless of, you know, the people who in religion, gender, or political affiliation or something. So there is an institute that take care of everything, and which means it has to be sovereignty for all people, for two nations that in this homeland, justice, Jerusalem for both people and everything.
So, just, you know, a lot of the people asked in the comments. So
Yeah.
it's clear, Warda, this is your solution, but you recognize very well that there's many steps that need to be taken in order to achieve that solution, and we need cooperative institutions in place in order to achieve our intended goals. Oh, Rudy, all you.
Before I go into this this issue, I want to say what a pleasure it is to speak with you, because you're a very deep thinker, and unfortunately, not many people today are. It's clear that you've thought very long and hard and are very passionate about this, and it means everything to you. So it's very beautiful thing to see. And also, like I told you before the live started, you see the positive in things, and it's people like that that are going to be able to actually move forward and create something as well. And I'm thankful to have elements of that as well for myself. And thank you again, Adele, for setting this up. And thank you to everyone who's viewing this either live or after, to be a part of our genuine conversation of being able to move forward. Right before I address the issues of a solution, there is a thing that was said in the beginning that I do want to say, and I think because you're someone that is such a deep thinker, that you will understand. You said that the past is only relevant if it still affects the present. And that's something that I, as your cousin, as someone that's living a few miles from you, as someone that, you know, our children will be raised in the same land together, I want you to understand that there are elements of the past that may not be relevant to you, but that are still very relevant to us and are still very much so part of our present. The same way, you know, when a lot of Israelis hear about the Nakba that you mentioned, I do think that there's a space and a place and a need for a day like the Nakba. However, the Nakba is celebrated on the solar calendar date of the liberation of Israel from the British imperial rule. I wish that the Nakba could be on a date where, let's say, a specific Palestinian village was displaced, so that a lot of Israelis could empathize and appreciate or even understand on a deeper level the Palestinian experience, and not only see it through a lens of they're trying to destroy us by talking about their pain. They're taking their pain out of context to destroy us, and not have Palestinians come to the conclusion that their suffering should be seen through the lens of Israel having ability to live here as well, Israelis being allowed to be here, and the British leaving, which was a victory for us all living in this land. So there are many things to unpack, but I think it's important to be open to histories meaning different things to different populations. And there are many elements of history that are still very much so relevant for us as Jewish people. And it's important to communicate that and for both of us to understand. Now, in terms of a solution, I'm against any form of a two-state solution. I will say this, I think that the details, which is actually the hardest part of your solution, I agree with. I don't agree with the structure. I definitely agree that we should have equal rights in the land, education, economic opportunities, open borders, resources. I mean, the reality that Palestinians today, in Gaza have lights turned off at a certain time, that Palestinians sometimes don't have running water in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, that, these are realities that are horrible and have to change. This is someone as an Israeli that doesn't have to suffer from that. I'm telling you that I want to help and I want to help Israelis get on the page of being able to help and change that situation. But for me, any sort of solution that will come in the future, first of all, it cannot be imposed by foreign governments. Too many of the times, there are foreign players coming and dividing us because they're profiting from us being in conflict, especially Europe and especially America. Right? America gives a lot of foreign aid to Israel. All that aid is translated into weapons, right? It's not actually money, it's credit that Israel has to use, which Israel then becomes dependent on a foreign aid, which I don't want Israel to be dependent on any country, on any military, on any source of anything. And it allows America to control the conflict. And if there was no conflict, we wouldn't need weapons anymore. If there's no weapons, it hurts part of the industries that America relies on. So we need to remove these outside players that are preventing us from actually discussing with each other. And we need to also empower representatives that truly represent the populations. And I think many leaders within both the Palestinian leadership, whether that be the PA or Hamas, or even the Israeli government, find it functional to keep the status quo going because they are allowed to maintain their position, they're allowed to maintain their salaries, they're allowed to maintain their income, and because of that, they're fine with the situation. And even let's bring it onto to the Israeli side. The way that the system exists in terms of our government, of having a British parliamentary system existing in a Middle Eastern land that doesn't function for our people, the politicians think about solutions, short-term solutions, because they need to get elected in the next 4 years, if not before, if a coalition breaks. So they care about proving that their coalition or their leadership was right. So we care more about short-term accomplishments to get reelected rather than long-term solutions. And what me and my counterpart are talking about is long-term, but necessary to start now and to speak about now in order to create in the future. And I believe the way to do that is to empower the people. Now, for me, in terms of a solution, what is important for me is to solve two things, and I say this very often, is to solve the injustices that both populations experience, both Israelis, both Palestinians, and they are both real. They are different, but they are both real. For Israelis, it's not just an inconvenience. Every single Israeli knows someone that has died from this conflict. Every single Palestinian knows someone that has died for this conflict. These are true lives that should not have been taken, lives that could have created so much positive and that impacted so many families in a negative way. So we need to understand the sufferings that we both go through, that we've both been through, and we need to also understand the aspirations that we both have, which may be different. What is important for Palestinians may not be so important for Israelis, and we should not impose this importance onto Israelis just because it's also important to Palestinians, and vice versa. If something is important to Israelis, it might not be important to Palestinians. We have to have these real conversations to figure out what is the list of things that we need to end in this country for the experience of both, and what is the list of needs to build and to have in order for both to fulfill their aspirations. And once we have that conversation, and once we start building from there together, not one over the other, not one instead of the other, but together, once we start building from there, I think eventually we can achieve a solution. And I think a solution is a process, is something that will be built. Just like, let's say, a company or an idea, it has to pivot many times before it's able to succeed. So even any sort of solution that we throw out may have to pivot many times. And my potential solution of what I have in mind, which I'm going to share, may have many flaws. And your potential solution that you've shared may have many flaws. But if we don't have these conversations, If we don't build these relations, we're never going to get to any solution. And that is a crime to both of our peoples and both of our descendants. Now, I'm going to give a hypothetical solution of what could potentially happen. And the reason I say hypothetical is because I am nobody to impose a solution. I don't think we need to impose, but I do think we need to bring up new ideas. And I think, again, a solution is going to be something that's going to be accomplished. A hypothetical solution is a sort of federation plan. Okay, a federation plan where there are no more walls, not walls physically, no more walls psychologically. There are equal rights to opportunity. There are equal rights to movement. There are equal rights to the economy, to resources, to education that you mentioned many times, because you're coming from an educational background, and clearly that's something that's so important to you. These things should be open and equal to all. However, I think a two-state solution does not solve the injustices, because an injustice for us is not being able to have to be able to move. And we know that if there's a state that is created that is Palestinian, especially the way the situation exists today, there won't be equal access of movement, that Israelis won't be able to live there. And even if hypothetically part of our aspirations as Jews is to revive that civilization that existed on a specific piece of land that includes Judea and Samaria, which is the heartland of our civilization. That area, West Bank, Judea and Samaria, is the heart of who we are, is the heart of the land. That we don't see this land as property. We don't see this land as ownership. We don't see it as something that the way a lot of Westerners view land. We see this as our soulmate. It is something that is internally and eternally connected to us forever. And other peoples may have relationships to this land as well. But we need to be able to create a civilization that does have borders on the specific land that did belong to our native history. And what Palestinians, from my experience, this solution I'm speaking of is something that came from many conversations that we've developed between Israelis and Palestinian leaders. I'm part of a grassroots movement in Israel called Habayit. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I know that Hadar is familiar with it. It's called Habayit, the home. And the goal of this is to bring local individuals, leaders, activists, people that are passionate from both sides, whether in Palestinian refugee camps or in villages that are Israeli, or all sorts of areas where we can find a way to build common ground and build those relationships. And a lot of those people are my friends, are people that I don't only see as family, as an ideological part, but I was able to create a personal relationship with. And in a lot of the conversations, we talk about this potential federation plan, where let's say what is more important to Palestinians that I would say is not important to Israelis is local control. There is a need for a lot of Palestinians to feel that they control their own community, and the way that the security, the economy, and the education is done locally on the local level, whereas for Israel, more domestic level is more important. So can we create a way to find a balance of power and maybe create, let's say, for example, 8 different federations in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, and there would be a separate governing body that is connected to the Knesset that has also power, that has also representation, or maybe there would be a certain amount of Knesset seats allocated to every single region, and people voting locally would not be based on if you're Palestinian or Israeli, but based if you're living there. Let me break that down a little bit further. If, let's say, you're living in one of these 8 regions, 10 regions, 20 regions, let's just say 8 for now, and you're an Israeli and you move to, let's say, Shechem, which is one of these regions, okay, you would vote locally and no more in the Knesset. And if you're a Palestinian and you're moving to Tel Aviv, you're no longer voting locally, you're now voting for the Knesset. So it has nothing to do with who you are, it has to do with who you live. And in a structure like this, again, it's a hypothetical. In a structure like this, you're actually able to keep the country Jewish enough for Jews to achieve their aspirations, and Palestinians enough for Palestinians to feel their local aspirations and their ability to move and their ability to trade and their ability to have representation and their ability to have economic trade and opportunity and education. And I do believe we can create a system that does work for all. However, it must do the 2 things. It must solve the injustices that both populations have. And if one population suffers, both will suffer. There's no future without either population, and there's no future without both of us coming together in order to solve that problem. And it must focus on the aspirations that we have, which are different, but are too often, more often than not, unheard and unrelated and uncommunicated, and too many people around the world are dividing our population. And that's why a conversation like this is so important.
I can tell you that I came from a very ancient movement. It's called that I was believe in what you believe, federal country, which means that both people live together in the same, we doesn't care what it's called, but it has to be shared country. But you know, in this situation, maybe it will be later. This federation country, it will be later. As for now, people, Palestinian people, has it's you know kind of psychological also thing that they have to feel self-determination, to run their own life, to feel secure and safe with the other neighbor, and the same from Israeli people, Jewish people who about 70 years or something felt that this neighbor is not a partner. So both people need a time to self-determination, to self-management, to self-empowerment, while you know the confederal nature helps them to arrange to equal levels. Then after I don't know how many years, maybe the confederal government think that it's time to mix it together, and no need for two countries. It can be one country. But you know, for now, I think the people in Palestine who suffered from occupation, the people in Israel who suffered from stigmas and from the attacks of violent attacks or something, both violent, both suffers from violent life from each other. They need the time to crystallize their life again with the other neighbor. Then maybe, and you know, I agree with you, we can live together. But in this way, I don't know how many how many people in Israel can agree with you, because they want majority of Jewish people in this kind of country, which is federal. No majority for Jewish. But if they live in peace, so any kind of people difference, Palestinians, you know, in Bedouins, you know, in Druzian Muslims, Christians, Jewish, they have their own life, their own free beliefs, and they respect each other. So when we arrive to this, you know, to this psychological border of drop it down, maybe the federal country will be very close solution. After the confederal solution will succeed. Before that, I don't think that it will be, you know, because there is, it takes time until both people, feel secure and feel, you know, equal for each other. I'm as for example, if I was an Israeli occupying another people, I can't see him after 72 years equal to me unless he crystallized his life and empower himself. We need this time. We need this time to make the solution succeed. I hope
So,
in your life it will.
real quick, just to make sure we fully understand your objection to one state, it's that if we go straight to a federation, that there won't be equality between both sides psychologically, right? That Israelis will still view Palestinians as lesser, and Palestinians will still view Israelis as oppressors.
Yeah.
And if Palestinians are given the opportunity to have a state where it's just fully sovereign, the state of Palestine, that will create a situation in which there is not that psychological difference between both sides.
Yeah.
This is an interesting point that I've never really thought about, so thank you for bringing it up. Rudy, you have thoughts about that?
Yeah. So again, for the most part, I think we agree on the specifics. I think it's the structures that we disagree on. So again, like I said before, the solution that I brought forth is not the solution that I push for. I don't push for any solution. I push to build a relationship between both populations, and in order for both those populations to find that solution together, I think it's a process. And I think in order to get there, we have to deconstruct a lot of the hatred that exists between both of our populations, a lot of the misconceptions and a lot of the prejudices, and create new experiences. Right? We've had negative experiences. Like I said, I've lost friends of mine. I lost a friend 3 years ago, and I lost another 4 friends in one summer. So this is very real to me. But I never, and I can't say that to everyone. I understand people's pain, and people might take it to dark places. I never took that pain and channeled it into a fuel to find hatred towards Palestinians. And I realized that this happened because we're at war. People die at war. People die at any war, which is why we should not have war. And in order to change that and to create a reality, we need to create human relations and new experiences and new abilities to understand one another. When we said we need to give the time to crystallize, I mean, that argument can be said for Israelis as well. Imagine all the people that have lost family members. They would say, well, for 72 years, they've been attacking us and doing everything to kill us and this and that. And again, it's generalizing Palestinians. And I don't believe all Palestinians are defined by those who committed those acts of terror or those acts of resistance, right? I don't identify all Palestinians, but in their minds, so many of the population will say, no, well, they need to just leave the country, and then we'll crystallize, and then we'll allow them to come back. That's not a reality. We can't just do things that won't solve the injustices and won't fulfill the aspirations. We have to really focus on these 2 points. And a 2-state will, in my opinion, will never solve the injustices, and definitely does not fulfill the aspirations of the Jewish people. And I think doesn't fulfill the aspiration of Palestinians, in my opinion, also based on what I've heard from a lot of Palestinians. So I think on the details we agree on, but maybe in the structure we don't. In terms of a Palestinian state, it's not because a population feels that they deserve a state that gives them the right to deserve a state, right? If tomorrow the Bedouin and the Druzim and the Cherkessim and the Bahi community and the Greek Orthodox and all these different minorities that live in Israel, they get up tomorrow and say, oh, well, we want a state too, because they feel that they need a state and they need to crystallize a state that gives them a right to create a state. Or let's say if you had Jews living in Saudi Arabia and this community has been living there for 500 plus years, and all of a sudden the Jews in Saudi Arabia wake up and say, you know what, we believe we need to have a state and we're also indigenous to this land of Arabia. No, I would be against that. I don't think that Jews are indigenous to Saudi Arabia. I don't think Jews should deserve a state in a land that belongs to someone else. So I'm not against the concept of a Palestinian state. I'm against the concept of a creation of a state on a native civilization of any population. If a Palestinian state were to be created on another land somewhere else, sure, but it cannot be created on the native civilization of the Jewish people. And that's what I think we need to understand when it comes to self-determination. Self-determination is different for different populations. There's a lot of things that is so important that I've learned over the past few years that is important for Palestinians, that is not important at all for Israelis, like local control, right? One individual, you go into that village and everyone's pointing, that's our leader, right? The Israelis don't really have that. That's our elected mayor, but we don't really know him. We don't care about him. And the vast majority of the population have no idea who their mayor is in their city. There are different importances to different populations. And I think we cannot just put a blanket of aspirations on both that and self-determinations on both that don't apply to one another. So that's part of this conversation. And what's important of coming out of this conversation is understanding what are the elements of self-determination that need to be respected. And I do truly believe that we can accept both self-determinations in a way that don't oppose one another and the way that fulfills those for both populations. An example of that was the plan that I offered, but even if it's not that plan, I'm not the person that's going to find the solution. I'm part of a generation that needs to start coming together, and that's my role in this. My role is to be able to bring people together, and together we will find that solution. And it's not based, I don't think it's going to come from governments. I think it's going to come from populations, and maybe we will change those governments, or maybe through us, the governments will have to do what we seek. But there are many times in history, I'm someone that loves history, but if we look at many countries, let's say France and Germany, they fought wars for hundreds of years. and today they're not enemies. So we've been fighting a war, we've lost people, and we're still going to lose people. The solution is not going to come tomorrow, right? But I do believe we can transcend it. And if we focus on channeling all of our passions, because we're all passionate about this. And at the end of the day, we all believe we're the good guys, right? And even the worst of people think they're the good guys. So we need to apply an understanding and take a step back and understand we all think we're the good guys in our stories. And in the Israeli movie, the Jews are the protagonists and the Palestinians are the antagonists. And in the Palestinian movie, the Palestinians are the protagonists and the Israelis are the antagonists. But in order to transcend that, we need to create a new movie where we're both the protagonists, and the forces that are profiting off of our suffering are those that are an antagonist. And if we start thinking about it that way, we can focus so much more on building something that works. And you'll never forget the pain that you experienced, but you can create so much more better of using that pain and using that to fuel energy in order to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Rudy, just real quick. So about what you said about being Indigenous and what gives people the right to a state. Being Indigenous isn't zero sum. So, all we need to look at is at the history of the world and see that if you go back far enough, no one is truly indigenous to any country. All hominids came out of Africa, and, we spent the past 15, 20,000 years conquering the entire globe from one another. So Jews, yeah, we're indigenous to the land of Israel, but we probably weren't the first hominids here, right? So at what point does being indigenous give you the right to a state, and at what point does it not? So Palestinians living here, they've been here for many generations. This is the only land they know. They too are indigenous. We could have a debate to the extent in which they're indigenous compared to Jews being indigenous, but I actually don't see that as a productive debate. We just need to acknowledge that you have the West Bank, you have around 3 million Palestinians living in the only land they've ever known, wanting a nation of their own. How can we say that they don't have a right to a state? Now, I'm not saying that that's the best solution. Maybe perhaps a federation is a better solution, but I don't see us being in a place to say that they don't have the right to statehood, but we do.
Great questions, really great questions. First of all, I'm going to address the point of indigeneity. I'm not the one creating this term. I'm not the one dictating to anybody how we should define this term. There's an actual definition to it. Indigenous councils from around the world have created a term. I've created a whole document. You can look up the UN doctrine on indigenous rights. And I've taken many classes while I was in university on this specific doctrine, on the struggles of indigenous peoples. And it's a very specific word. Now, if we all look back in terms of history, we all came from bacteria from the ocean. Yeah, even before we were all human beings in Africa and evolved from there. But you wouldn't tell that to a Native American in the Americas or in Canada. You would not tell that to a Tibetan wanting to live in Tibet. You would not tell that to a Maori or an Aboriginal in Australia that their land doesn't mean anything in relationship to their culture because we once upon a time evolved from somewhere else. I think that indigenous relationship to land is important, is vital. It's sort of like the movie Avatar. If anyone has seen the movie Avatar, it's a relationship that we have with this land where we feel it's a part of us. I mean, Jews cannot plant, we plant a tree and we can't eat from the tree for a certain amount of years to let the tree rest. And every 7 years, we have to let the tree rest again. We have a relationship with this land that is not existent on any other land. So indigenous means a collective, right? It's not individuals, it's a collective that was the first nation, first civilization on this land. And the Jewish people are indigenous to Judea. We're the first civilization, the first nation on this land. Now, there are other nations that can move in and live amongst us. That's why we have Bedouin and Druzim and even Arabs that had come from Arabia. That's why in South Africa, white people are not indigenous to South Africa. They can live equally, but are not indigenous. White people in the Americas, they can live in America, but they're not indigenous to Americas. So when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Judea, when you dig in this land and you find the history of the civilization of the Jewish people, I mean, even cities like Nablus, right, which is one of the biggest today Palestinian cities, that city was renamed from Shem to Neapolis by the Romans. Neapolis is new city. Right. And the reason why it's called Nablus is because P is not in Arabic. So Neapolis, Neopolis. right? And so we need to understand that there was so many layers of colonization that happened post the colonization of the native civilization 2,000 years ago by the Romans, and that many populations have since lived there. But again, I would ask you, Adal, if Jews were living, like you said, hundreds of years in Saudi Arabia, would that make them indigenous to Saudi Arabia? And I'm sure you would probably tell me no. And if you are going to tell me no, then you can't say that another population living in a native civilization is indigenous to that land just because they've lived for a certain amount of years, because indigeneity doesn't come based on the amount of years that you lived in the land or the individual relationship that you have in the land. It comes with being the first nation that is collectively connected to this specific land, not any other land. And I do believe that Palestinians have a relationship with this specific land, right? However, it's a different relationship than the Jewish people have. When we pray towards someone, we pray towards Jerusalem. When Arabs, or sorry, Muslims, because there are many Christian Arabs as well, they pray towards Mecca, towards Arabia. They speak a language called Arabic from Arabia. I mean, even the name Palestinian was not originally their name. It belonged to the Plishtim, which were a foreign invader nation completely from a different region of the world from the West. And in fact, Plishtim, Palestinians, literally is a Hebrew word that means invaders. Now, that doesn't mean Palestinians are invaders, but we have to break down these histories in order to understand the relationship with the land. So I do believe that Palestinians have a right to live here equally, that they are my cousins, that we need to create a civilization together. But I would do a disservice to the term indigenous. I would do a disservice to our aspirations to just throw that word in order to appease people, in order to make people happy, because I respect that word and I respect its definition. Now, in order for a country to have a right to exist, there are two arguments to be made. There's the moral argument, or there's the current power argument. The moral argument is that this country belongs to the native population and thus have a right to liberation. So you can say, look at the Tibetans. They want to go back to Tibet and they want to have a right over there and create a country, because also different indigenous peoples have different aspirations. Native Americans don't want to create a country. They want a different relationship with the land that is not a country, because they don't believe that man owns land. They believe that land owns man. Aboriginals also in Australia don't want to create a country. So it's important to understand that different indigenous relationships with land express themselves differently, but Tibetans do want their country again, do have a connection to that land, and so do Jews. So one of the arguments for a right for a country to exist is the indigenous historical moral argument. The second argument is that that country today exists. That country today is powerful. And so someone would say, you know, arguing for China, that China today controls Tibet and it's their land, and what can you do about it? If Tibet wants it back, fight the war, win the war, and then you'll get it back. So the reality of the situation when it comes to Israel is it has both of those arguments. One, we're the native civilization. There was no civilization that was built since the destruction of our civilization. It was just a territory controlled by a foreign empire that applied a name by the Romans, called it Palestine, preserved that name until the British Empire, until it was liberated from the British Empire by the Jewish people. The Jews were the ones that terrorized the British for them to leave, making the price of occupation more expensive than the benefits of exploitation, the benefits that they were taking from being in the land. We forced them to leave. Right. So we have the argument of being the native people. We have also the argument of being the country that exists. Okay. And so again, I think these are narratives and they might offend people. And I think maybe a lot of people may disagree with me on the Israeli side and Palestinian side. But I think that the bottom line of the last or the second half of this conversation is that when it comes to the future, right, we agree on the needs that need to happen. We agree on the sufferings that need to end. And that is the basis for creating a solution that you were talking about. And I do think that can be created through a process of creating normalization, and not normalization of suppressing pain, not normalization of forgetting identity, but normalization of creating human relationships between both populations that are family. We say shalom aleichem, they say salam alaikum, right? We have the same culture. We have the same father. You know, we might have a different mother, but we have the same father. We've lived in this land for thousands of years, right? And I believe in a greater future where we could actually create a united Middle East, where Israel can help Yemen with their water struggles over there, and Israel can play soccer in the Middle East with the other countries that exist and compete not in the European Eurovision, but in the Middle Eastern singing contest. We need to create a better reality for all Middle Easterners and to unite as one Semitic population.
Speaking about one father, so father gives the land for one son and not the other son. So you make it again that this land is for both people, even before 2000 years, because we have the same father. Yeah. So if we go into that history, that's mean that we are two brothers for the same fathers, the same father, and father give this land for us both the same way and the same how to say, dividing. So as I told you before, we talk about the present and the future, and I'm so happy that I talk to you about this, and I hope that the federation country one day will come, but meanwhile I hope that we create a confederation country, so it will be more easier to take the people together and make peaceful way together. Thank you, and I hope we will meet again in some time, and we will talk about this again in different perspectives.
B'ezrat Hashem, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Warda, you're signing off now?
No, because it's 10 something.
Yeah. Look, if you guys are cool to stay on a little bit longer, I would like to take some questions. If it's past your bedtime, though, we can let you go and we can have this. We can continue another time.
Maybe set a timer where, for the next 15 minutes we take a Q&A.
Exactly. We'll do 15 minutes of questions, and we're gonna try to keep it to 1 minute responses. I know it's tough to do a 1 minute response for something so complex. So guys, we're moving to Q&A. If you guys enjoyed what you saw here, I would like to invite everybody, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I upload weekly content. This week, I'm actually interviewing Rudy on my podcast. It's going to be an in-person video interview. So there's going to be audio and video. Me and Rudy have a lot of, we agree on a lot of things. We disagree on a lot of things. Today, I'm trying to stay as neutral as possible, but we will further explore our differences in this podcast, and it's going to be a great conversation. I can ensure that. I'm also going to put a link in the chat right now to Rudy's Facebook page and Instagram page, and to Warda's Facebook page. Follow them, reach out to them. They love engaging with people. They can answer your questions. They'll talk to you. And again, thank you so much for being here. So yeah, guys, start asking your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get please try to keep it to 1 minute responses.
Okay.
There's been a lot of questions, but they got lost in the chat. Another thing I want to point out is that I would like everybody, if you took one thing away from this conversation, it's how an Israeli and a Palestinian, with obvious differences in opinions, can come together and have a constructive dialogue. It's not something we see often, and it's not something we're seeing too much in the comments section, where I see a lot of fighting going on. Some of it is productive and respectful, but there are a lot of, just those jeering and snarky remarks. I think we could do better, but I do recognize that it's hard to get a nice coherent point across in a comment section. So I do recognize that, but I would like people to take that away. Warda, one question we had, this is just brief. Somebody asked if you're a Muslim or a Christian.
Can you ask me about?
Yeah. Somebody asked if you're Muslim or a Christian.
Normally I don't like to say what is my religion. I belong to a Christian family, but Christianity is something that it's very private for me, and I learn all the values from being Christian when I was very religious, when I was very young. But it's not. I can't say that I'm religious, or religion for me, taking the values and the common values of every religion, and be how to say that, be benefit from it. Be benefit from the values of the religion, but without being religious.
Cool, thank you. A question for Rudy from Yuda Schwartz. Will Palestinians get full citizenship in the federal state?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be fully equal, but we have to understand that we're talking about developing a separate body of government, or having a certain amount of Knesset seats allocated to the region. And this system not being built on who you are having the right to vote in different bodies or in different ways, but where you live. And there would be a balance. So let's say if you're living in one of the regions of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, one of these federations, you would have more local power. You would have an own security. You would have more local power in terms of control over your education and control over your economy, which are things that are deeply important to Palestinians that would not be addressed in creating a one state or a two state, right? These are things that are important to them, and less maybe domestic control, where they would still have domestic representation, but it would allow the civilization to be more Jewish or Jewish enough for Jews and more Palestinians or Palestinian enough for Palestinians. And again, this solution can be completely flawed. It can be a ridiculous idea. But the point is what I always focus on is creating a solution that fixes the problems for both and fulfills the needs for both.
Cool. So I see a bunch of people are asking again the issue of security under a two-state solution. So as Warda explained, we can't go straight to, it's not something that will happen overnight. We need a process. We need institutions in place. We need peace building measures in place that ensure that when a two-state solution is created, that you have it with enough trust and security for both sides. So it's not something that happens overnight. It's, you know, there's a process that has to be built, and it probably is, you know, and Warda, maybe you have a little bit more optimism than me. Building a situation in which we can achieve a two-state solution, if that's the solution we go to, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of roadblocks, and security being a major one of them. Is it as simple as just having the institutions in place?
If you ask me, I think the two states will solve all the two states program will solve all the disputes of peaceful ways, and will act against any violence and terror. As I told you, each of the two countries will be sovereign on all matters relating to protecting public order without its borders and within its borders. And then, you know, personal security of its residents. Armed military and unauthorized organization will be disarmed, because, you know, no need for armed militias. The two states will enter a mutual defense treaty against external threats. For example, no foreign military power will enter the territory of either this country or this country, but only in agreement. So I think shared Supreme Security Council will be formed to monitor and decide on common security issues. You know, the council may deploy a joint force to protect the external borders with the agreement of both states. So, you know, it's as you said and I said before, and I think also Rudy agree with us. It's not, you know, that you create this and you will work. You will work for this a long time. But when you work both Palestinian and Israeli together, that you say this as an aim for both, a goal for both, they will succeed, because these people from here and these people from here will support them. And when they support them, even if there is a violent person here or here, they can get him in order to order. That's, we can't say every in every country there is some violent people, but when we talking about violence against this country or this country against this community or this community, they together will be strong together to the defense this kind of security. They have to work for it, because it's for they benefit from this, both of them, they benefit from this.
Great. A question, this is from Serena. It looks like it's directed towards me, and if not, please clarify. But the question is, what is your opinion on Palestine becoming a territory of Israel and with the Palestinian president in control over their own economy? So a little bit about, my perspective here, because I didn't really share much. I'm really agnostic when it comes to the solution. I am looking for a solution that the majority of both populations view as just, one that provides them security, one that provides them freedom of movement, and the ability to be prosperous. If that is in the form of a two-state solution, then I would support that. If it's in the form of a federation or confederation, I would support that. So I really approach this from I take a humanistic approach. I want what's best for the most amount of people. And I would get behind any solution that seems like, it can achieve those intended goals. So to answer your question, Serena, I can support a solution like that. I have nothing ideologically against it, as long as it achieves the goals that I mentioned. Okay. Another question. How can we approach the government in a place to propose such solutions and have both people to work together? This is from Esther. So I think, Esther's getting at something that many other people are asking. It's like, what is the next step? What can we do today and tomorrow to progress the peace process? And this is a question for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think things like what we're doing right now is a start, having those conversations, understanding one another, building those human relations. And eventually through that, we can find conclusions built off of both of our narratives, built together, and start working towards there, right? The analogy that I often give, it's, I think, a beautiful analogy that I heard once, talking about a solution right now is like picking a frame on a masterpiece painting before actually making the painting, right? If you are an artist, the first thing that you do is you come up with some sort of idea in your mind, then you go pick your canvas, the texture, the size, then you pick your paintbrushes and the paint, then you start to paint, you mess up, you fix it, and then at the end of the day, you take a step back when you're finally done, and you're like, well, you know what, this frame fits best, a wood frame or a metal frame or a small frame or a large frame. And talking about solutions right now, and like, where are we going to be, 100 years down, 20 years down, 10 years down, however long it's going to take, is approaching the situation in the wrong way, because the artists, Israelis and Palestinians, and also others that are living in this land that are not Israeli and are not Palestinian, right, have to be the ones having this conversation. And once we have the conversation, we can pick our canvas, we can pick our paintbrushes, we can pick our paint, we can start to paint, we can mess up and fix where we messed up, because I'm sure it's not going to be we come together, we find it, and then we go. There are going to be some hiccups along the way, and it will take all of us to overcome those hiccups. And then once we eventually get there, we will have that frame that we all desire to have. So I think we need to approach the situation like that. I think the solution are going to come more from the people and not from the governments. And so having those conversations, having these ideas, and having especially the next generation start to wake up to a different reality than the realities that we're used to, that I think is the first step.
My turn. Okay. I think, as you said, it's a long way, but we started already, not from today. It's another start with the Rudy today, but it started before. I invite you to go to the sites of Minds of Peace, for example. They have three kinds of solutions, and there is debates on it, and there is events. And there is also another organization called Lands for All. that they are also with the confederal state, and they have materials about these solutions. And as much as people go to these organizations and also support them by attending, by voting sometimes when they need voting, because they have to decide which plan, for example, better than the other, or which step it's better than the other. Also, there is, for example, a woman which peace who have, from the old strata of people, from the left and the right, Palestinians, from these stream and these streams. Women WHP is also a good planet for to share your ideas and to crystallize your ideas. So I think we already started. People already started. I can guarantee for you, as much as you speak with Rudy with Palestinian people, you will love more Palestinian people, and as much Palestinian people will sit with Israeli people and listen to them, they will more like and love to work with them. I said always, we have two truths, and these two truths, is okay for both. We have to go everyone with his truth towards the other truth of the other, and this make us feel more peaceful and go forward.
Amen.
Amen.
Inshallah. So guys, we're going to wrap it up. Whoever did not get their question answered, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, on YouTube. Feel free to reach out to Rudy or Warda. We are all happy to engage and continue this conversation. We will host another debate in a week, and there will be a podcast with Rudy and I having a nice discussion, also being released early next week. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It really was a pleasure. Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Warda. It was great. If you guys have any final words, feel free. Now's the time.
Sure.
As I said before, sorry. As I said before, a human relationship will make peace than the governments. And I hope that, and Rudy also say that, I hope that people will make the peace and don't let other countries or other authorities outside of our lives to determine our lives, to determine our future, to determine our peace, our life of peace.
Yeah, definitely agree that it will take the population, and it's not going to come from the governments as much as we wish it to come, because it would be quicker because they are the ones in power. And as what you said in the previous comment, the real truth is both of our truths combined, a more holistic truth, one that includes both of them together. And the way we achieve that is by doing things like what we're doing today. And I want all the viewers to take this experience, take this conversation, whether they listen to this live or listening to this later, and understand that me and my counterpart, there are plenty of things that we disagreed on. But at no points did we antagonize one another. At no points did we disrespect one another. At no point did we even see each other as the enemy. We actually, the entire time, even when we disagreed, saw each other as necessary elements to find a way to move together. And all those that are either Israelis or Palestinians, open your hearts to be able to accept a reality that allows others to exist within your own reality. And for those that aren't Palestinians, that are allies to Palestinians or allies to Israelis, understand that it's your responsibility to help us come forward. And if you're doing something that tears us apart, you are part of the problem. So if you're coming to help us, try to help us come together, because it's only together that we'll move forward.
Beautifully said. Again, thank you guys, and I look forward to doing this again in the near future.
Thank you, Ada, for inviting us. It was very amazing talking to you and to Rudy, really.
Me too.
And hope for